to Open Up. This is an open discussion podcast around inclusive design, providing insights on disability and age inclusion to level up. So today I am joined by Christine Hemphill, who is part of Open Inclusion. So let's start there with the introductions, and I'll introduce myself in a second. Christine, how would you introduce Open Inclusion?
Thanks, Juliette. Open Inclusion is a disability and age inclusive insight, design and innovation organisation. We're based in London. We're now operating globally, but I really founded the organisation 7 years ago now. Time does fly when you're having fun, with a very simple mission. And that mission is to inform design and innovation to make it more usable, more delightful and more inclusive of everyone, by having the voices and experiences of people with disability and functional needs difference, whether they think, feel, move or sense differently, as part of that design process. So when people are making something, they think about the users essentially, and they think about the breadth of that users sufficiently and are informed by people with that experience so they can make better things that work more consistently, more delightfully for more people.
Brilliant. So this is a little taster of what the podcast will be like. So here's a little taster of who I am. I am Juliette Burton, and I am going to be your host for Open Up, the podcast. And I am Open Inclusion's panel lead for the mental health community. But I'm not just that. I also do a lot of work as a mental health speaker. I'm an ambassador for a mental health charity in the UK called Rethink Mental Illness. I have lived experience of mental health conditions throughout most of my life. I'm sure that will come up in some of the podcasts in the future. And I also work not only as a speaker for a number of different events and organisations and mental health training as well in the workplace. I'm also a comedian and a performer in live entertainment. So I've used my lived experience of mental health conditions and therefore being a part of the disability community in my stage shows and my comedy and my performance, multimedia performances, making them as inclusive as possible and accessible as possible as well. And now I'm hosting this wonderful podcast, which I'm very excited by. I'm going to meet so many wonderful people. The first person is, of course, Christine. Christine, how would you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Juliette. And it's such a delight to have you hosting this. Thank you for saying yes to doing this with us. And I'm really looking forward to where these discussions are going to lead us and some of the fabulous people that you're looking to bring to this and the conversations that you'll have. I'm Christine Hemphill. I, as mentioned, founded and am the managing director of Open Inclusion. I come really from a design and insight background and really saw probably over a decade ago how human difference is really understood by people who are creating things that we all use. And therefore, the things we all use, whether they're a product or a service or an experience, they're not that well designed for everyone. So it's essentially human-centered designer, but really think about who the humans are at the center of the design so that things work better. And it's been an absolute privilege to have the opportunity of building this organization that we really think about how do we inform that? How do we broaden the voices that are coming into the work that's being done to make the environments around us so that it just becomes more intuitive for people to recognize difference, understand it, and actually know what to do with it, which is a perfect segue into this podcast because this is just another way we can share those insights and broaden people's understanding.
Absolutely. And this podcast is a reinvigoration of a podcast that Open Inclusion used to have, and we're adding a bit more life to it now. We're reinventing it, aren't we, Christine? So we're now Open Up, which, as I've mentioned before, it is an open discussion podcast around inclusive design, providing insights on disability and age inclusion to level up. Is there anything else you want to add to what it is we want to bring to this new podcast, Christine?
Yeah, and I think you and I have had lots of discussions as we've been leading into resetting this podcast. And why do we want to create more noise in what's already a noisy world? And we really felt that there was a space here for a very positive, practical, but also informed diverse set of voices to come in to more deeply understand and help people more confidently act to reduce exclusion. So it's really that practicality of it, helping people learn from others where someone else has got a really great way of addressing the world around them that makes them better from the role that they're in. And that role might be as a designer or an advocate, or there's so many, we'll talk to who this is for, but so many different perspectives people might have that we can't possibly know all that. But by engaging with those wonderful people out there in the community, we can bring some of that really, really practical and very diversely informed perspectives into how we live our lives and how we inform the work that we do in our lives to make, at the end of the day, less exclusion out there.
You mentioned there that there's a lot of podcasts. There are so many. It's a noisy world, as you say, so many different podcasts out there. Particularly in this area, I'd quite love this podcast to be more about looking to solutions rather than problems. So admiring the problem was something that we've discussed quite a lot. This is a problem in itself. Lots of discussions around sort of segregation of them versus us in the disability community. So how are we going to do that differently in this podcast?
I love that term. And in fact, that came from a change maker in a different field. But this isn't about admiring the problem. There is a problem. We recognize that. This is about really practically thinking about the solutions. So, one of the things we're doing and the way, in our conversations leading up to this, we've really structured the conversations that we'll have with individuals coming on so people can share practical and helpful tips of what's worked with them. Lots of case studies, lots of really practical examples of, in this situation, while we were doing this thing, this is what worked for me, so that hopefully everyone coming to this podcast can take something out of every session that's really meaningful and useful to them in their daily life, so that we all learn as we go from each other, and that we don't get too caught up in the where things are going wrong, but we get caught up in absolutely understanding that, not pretending it's not wrong, but really looking forward from there to say, so how could we improve this with these different perspectives, kind of shining the light through that space of, here's the difficulty, now how might we address that? Not everything will work for everyone, because we all have different situations in our life and different tools and levers and capabilities and skills, but hopefully everyone will get something out of each podcast that's really practical and useful to you.
So it's about engendering positive change, right? And starting from wherever the individual listening to this is at today, and building intent, moving forward intentionally with purpose, and with no judgment whatsoever. For whoever's listening, you are all welcome to this podcast. We want to just help you forward in whatever way you want to move forward. So making sure that it's in your own way.
We only judge which direction people are going. And actually everyone can move forward in a very different way, as you've mentioned. And when people turn up with intent, we really want to help harness that. And oftentimes fear and complexity can get in the way of people wanting to move forward. It's not the intent's not there. They're not quite sure how, or they don't quite have the confidence, or they're worried about getting it wrong. And we want to really help unpick some of that and just make that more comfortable for people to turn up with their intent and take that step forward.
Who do you reckon the podcast is for, Christine?
That's the lovely segue into this, because it's anyone who wants to be part of the solution. That is anyone. It could be a parent of someone with a disability. It could be a designer, researchers, people living with different access needs themselves, product managers, disability activists, disability advocates, people who are disability allies that really want to support the community, understand that there's an important role for people that live and don't live with disability today. This is about bringing the whole community to the problem, not one part or just another part. Equally, accessibility professionals, accessibility amateurs. You don't need to be a professional. This is, again, equally non-judgmental on your experience to this point. Hopefully you'll all find something. People who can make change in different ways. So politicians, community leaders, community engagers, business leaders, all of these people have a part to kind of change the environment that we're in today. And our parts are all quite different. So we're very respectful of everyone can bring their own way to step forward. But if we're all moving, one step forward together, that's actually a lot of direction and a lot of change that's going to engender.
There's a lot of talk in disability communities at the moment around outward activism, and there has been for many, many years, and outward awareness raising. But I think hopefully with this podcast, we're going to talk not only about what you can do outward facing, extrinsic motivations, but also intrinsic motivations and inward activism, how you can change on a personal level as well as a community level as well as a global level. So starting off with those smaller personal changes, but how they can build to build a proper community that's going to be better for everybody. I'm very excited by this because I think conversations, it starts with conversations, and open conversations are what we're all about here at this Open Up podcast.
And I think what you're sharing there, Juliette, is so lovely because we have to start, it's the classic Gandhi quote of, be the change you want to see. We need to start by opening ourselves up and actually making space for new ways to learn, making space to finding new ways to make change in the world around us that might be easier or more impactful than the way we're doing it today. And actually sometimes we need to unlearn and make that space within us in order to relearn and see things through different perspectives and understand that actually our normal is not someone else's normal. I often joke about it. We have a fridge magnet in our house which says, remember, as far as anyone knows, we're a nice, normal family, which is a joke in our house because we're a highly neurodiverse family and we live in a culture where we don't even have the primary language is our native language and so on. So just, recognizing that we can step beyond our own normal, that we can help people make that little bit of space in their day when they're listening to this to think through someone else's eyes, perspectives, experiences. And that then can engender that change into your work, into your society, and more broadly, more globally at the end. But that's the kind of trigger effect from personal through to societal.
I'm very excited because I've been learning a lot recently about making sure that we don't hold ourselves back, that we're going to only move forward if we release ourselves from any cycles of shame about what we didn't know up till now, and being able to move forward, understanding that we didn't know what we didn't know because we didn't have the tools that we now are aware that we can learn. So this is a very exciting sort of time, I think, societally speaking as well, that we can move forward with humility and open-mindedness, and this Open Up podcast will be able to hopefully provide a few more tools for the listeners and also for myself. I'm very excited about what I'm going to learn. What will our key themes be, Christine, for the interviews that we're going to be doing on this podcast?
This is yet to be discovered. We've obviously got some that we know that we'd really like to have. So the first one, as Open as an inclusive research organisation, is clearly listening. Understanding different people's lived experience of society, whether that's different products they engage with, services, solutions, out and about having fun, travel and transport, these different places that inclusion or exclusion can happen, and understanding how when people meet those environments, things either feel delightful and wonderful because they've been well designed or they don't. So the first thing is really listening and getting that, helping people broaden their awareness of how things feel to to people across society. The second thing is really what we can do about that, and that's the design layer. That's given that we now know that there's gaps there and we're thinking about them more, in a more informed way, what can we actually proactively do to close those gaps? What are the tools we can bring to this, and who's practicing those tools today? How can we learn from them? And like you, I'm so excited to learn from this podcast myself, because we'll all take away, I hope, from every single episode something that's helpful and practical, so that we have more tools in our day-to-day life to help progress things. So we're not just understanding the problem, but we're actually designing up the solutions. And then thirdly, celebrating. I think celebrating some of the successes that are out there and being excited and sharing what's working really well, either as practices or actually as an outcome of those practices, and celebrating some of the successes that other people can really learn up from and, as you say, level up from.
So this podcast will be hopefully monthly. We're going to aim for that. And something I would like to ask all of our interviewees, whoever they may be, is what does inclusive design and innovation mean to you? And Christine, it seems an appropriate question to ask you as well for this little taster of what may come. So what does inclusive design and innovation mean to you?
I'm going to flip it slightly and say, what does disability mean to me? Because the answer is inclusive design and innovation. So to me, disability is that space, that the people with needs beyond which design and innovation has failed them. So inclusive design and innovation is essentially the tool that we have in our hands to address disability, to actually proactively move that line back, to have more people enabled by society, to be enabled by the products and services around them, to be enabled by the experiences that they're wishing to engage in, rather than disabled by them. And actually, inclusive design requires us to listen to where that exclusion happens today so that we can really actively address it. And if we think about what's the difference between inclusive design and inclusive innovation, inclusive design is probably taking what we have today and moving it practically forward in an incremental way, whereas inclusive innovation, and particularly inclusion-led innovation, is listening to people who are significantly and specifically excluded today and using that to make a really step change and a significant change in what's available out there, and being able to innovate the world around us so that rather than just move at an incremental rate from where we are, sometimes we can actually take things and move them a significant step forward.
That's fantastic. And why do you think as a society we need inclusive design and innovation?
If we look back and we think about where we started really moving towards human-centered design said, oh, dang, that designer doesn't necessarily know how people will use their product. They haven't gone through the 3 years of building it and thinking about it every day and every night. They've come at it fresh, and through their eyes, things did or didn't work so well. We need to see through their eyes more regularly all the way through, so we design better things. Actually, this is just taking exactly that same understanding that is now part of what design is. Good design is human-centered. In fact, we can almost remove the human-centered part of design, hopefully now, and just say, that's what good design is. Let's just call it what it is. I would love that in 5 years, 10 years time, 5 years, we don't talk about inclusive design. We just talk about good design. Humans differ. That is the one guaranteed thing between every single person that ever listens to this podcast, is that we will be fundamentally different to each other in some way. As I mentioned, how we see, feel, hear, think, move, hold things, take meaning from things, believe in things, value things. We are all fundamentally different beings. And if we're not designing for that difference, we're not designing for humans. So to me, good design is designing for difference. Today we call that inclusive design. In the future, I'd like to just call that good design.
We are all humans. You're absolutely right. We're all part of humanity, and part of what I'm keen to celebrate in this podcast and also in the discussions that we have is seeing the similarities and celebrating the differences, acknowledging the differences, but being bonded by our similarities. And as you mentioned, inclusive design, it's going to make the world much better for every single person, no matter their circumstances. So
just to pick up on that, sorry, Juliette, just so that I can layer in on that doesn't diminish the power of people who identify as disabled. Because disability, I've identified it really as a design problem, but actually people are very, there is a significant community of people that are very proudly part of a disability community, and that's part of the identity. So just recognizing disability has different senses to different people. There's obviously a legal definition that people need to be very conscious of if you're making products and services, and making sure that you don't disadvantage people in a way that you're required not to. There is a functional sense, which is where we've disadvantaged people by design, and that's the way I think of it. But there's also the identity sense that I'm very conscious of, that it's really important to people to feel part of a community. For some people, there are also people that are very disabled by the environments that don't identify as disabled. Particularly the older community, will not necessarily identify in the same way. So we're really respectful of those differences of how people want to be perceived and where their needs are met and not met.
And what is one thing, if you had to pick one thing that you would most like to see change that could help progress disability inclusion?
That we make space to listen. That we make space to actually understand different people's perspectives. I often use the acronym when I'm talking about inclusive design of SWIM, someone who isn't me. If you only have a little bit of time to ask someone else their perspective on something that you're thinking about designing, responsible for, whether that's a team in your workplace, a team, a football team, it doesn't need to be that you wear the label designer. It can be anywhere in your life. It could even be in your family. That you go to a perspective that's not yours and you ask people and we listen. And if we all listen a little bit more, that will just open us up to being able to do a little bit more.
Well, that's perfectly celebrating our listeners right now. You are listening to the Open Up podcast, which is all about inclusive design, and listening is a superpower. So we're hopefully going to have lots of wonderful superpower people listening to us right now. And what is it our lovely listeners can expect to learn on the podcast, Christine, over the coming weeks?
I think, enjoy being surprised. Enjoy listening in a really open way and hearing these perspectives that will be quite diverse and differentiated from people's experiences, from people's expertise, from people's different geographies, different access needs, different ways that they engage with what they do. Allowing ourselves to unlearn, as we mentioned, so really delighting in being able to let go of assumptions or beliefs that might be holding us back. Learning something practical. See if you can challenge yourself. We'll challenge you every time there's a podcast to take one thing away that might be of interest and useful to you in your daily life. And then, really building a broader understanding that over time we just kind of open up our perspectives a little bit more.
And we want to hear from you. It's all about listening. You're listening to us right now on this podcast, but we'd like to listen to you, our lovely listeners. What do you want out of this podcast? And who would you like on it? What would you like me to ask? Are there any questions that you're burning to have answered that I can be a voice piece for you? And if you would like to get into contact with us, we'd love to listen to you. So contact us on contact@openinclusion.com. So that's contact@openinclusion.com, and let us know what you'd like out of this podcast. Christine, is there anything else you'd like to say to our listeners before we wrap up this little taster?
No, just thank you to you. I am really excited and looking forward to hearing all the wonderful guests we've got planned coming up. And please stay tuned here, and we will also set up a way that you can sign up for this so that you can be informed of future releases. So you can always find this at openinclusion.com. But really look forward to, Juliette, hearing the next one. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine. That's the wonderful Christine Hemphill from Open Inclusion, just introducing you to this Open Up podcast and what we're going to be covering over the coming weeks and months. I've been Juliette Burton, and I can't wait to hear from you and to bring you more podcasts in the future. We're going to listen together and we're going to learn together. See you next time.